Music by Michael Goddard and Ravi Abu Khalil. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We're looking at the crisis in Iraq. Sunni Islamist rebels have seized control of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, as well as Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown. The rebels are now advancing toward Baghdad. 500,000 people have already been displaced in Mosul. Meanwhile, Iraqi Kurds have seized control of the northern oil city of Kirkuk.
And we're still with our guests. Mohammed Al-Dalemi is with us, an Iraqi journalist who's been reporting for McClatchy newspapers for years, now seeking asylum in the United States. Out of fear for his safety if he returns. This is his first TV broadcast interview. And Ned Parker is with us, Reuters bureau chief in Baghdad, Iraq.
Ned, I wanted to ask you to comment perhaps on two additional forces that may add greater impetus to the disintegration that's occurring now in Iraq. One is Muqtada al-Sadr. He has called for the formation now of peace brigades to head into the area to defend Shiite sites. And the impact and the role of Muqtada al-Sadr still in Iraq today. And then also the other is Turkey, this seizing of the Turkish nationals by the Islamist fighters, the possibility that Turkey, which it's happened in the past, has moved into Iraq in particular situations when it feels its national interests are threatened.
Right. With the call by Muqtada al-Sadr, I still don't know if that's 100% confirmed. There are a lot of rumors going on now. But I think you are right to address this issue of Shiite militia mobilization. Sadr has actually reined in his militia movement since 2008 and has largely shunned that type of activity on the street. That said, he still has his organization in place. In recent years, he has tried to wave the banner of Iraqi nationalism, stressing the unity of Shia and Sunni. He has rivals, though, that Mohammed Dalemi alluded to, Asab al-Haq, which is a breakaway faction from the Sadr movement that is supported by Iran, and that has been active, that has been fighting outside of Baghdad for months now since the fighting started in Anbar in January. So we have seen militia-style killings and fighting. Asab al-Haq and another group called Kitab Hezbollah, they have had their fighters alongside Iraqi forces, and as we've reported in Reuters, they actually fall as volunteers under an Iraqi government chain of command now. But the fact that Sadr might have activated his militia force again, or that he could, it shows the power of sectarian passions right now, and the danger that the more you see Sunni extremism, it breeds Shia extremism, and it cancels out the space for moderation and impels Iraq towards the danger of a new sectarian conflict.
And the issue of Turkey?
Right. Yeah, Turkey has always been active in Iraq, I think since the time of Saddam Hussein in the Kurdish regions. They've had special forces. They've had this diplomatic mission in Mosul. They've bombed Kurdish mountains where Kurdish separatists from Turkey have had bases. What this does now, it's interesting. I think it plays into the dynamics of Syria as well. We could see this affecting what Turkey allows to happen inside Turkey. Walking around in Istanbul now, it's not too hard to see possible jihadists wandering the street, you know, on their way back from Syria or about to go there.
I wanted to ask about the role of the United States in Iraq. This is State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki speaking Wednesday.
We've expedited, as you know, shipments of military equipment since the beginning of the year. We've ramped up training of Iraqi security forces and worked intensively to help Iraq implement a holistic approach. As you noted, Arshad, the situation is certainly very grave on the ground. We are working with Iraqi leaders from across the country to support a coordinated response. You can expect that we will provide additional assistance to the Iraqi government to combat the threat from ISIL, but I'm not in a position to outline that further at this point.
That's the State Department spokesperson. If you could respond to her and also talk about the piece you wrote, 2 years ago in Foreign Affairs, The Iraq We Left Behind, listing the failures of U.S. policy in Iraq.
Right. I think one of the great tragedies about the United States relationship with Iraq both inside Iraq and here, is that the matter is so politicized that it's hard to have a real conversation about what needs to happen now in Iraq so that it can be stabilized. The American involvement happened, and what I wrote 2 years ago, for instance, was talking about, in the time of the Obama administration, the neglect, if you will, of trying to build upon the chances for success after so much bloodshed and horror during the Bush years, and there was a chance for stability in Iraq in 2010. The decision to withdraw troops on the ground from Iraq, it's debatable whether that was a right decision or a wrong decision, but I think the core issue is matters of soft power that don't necessarily have anything to do with U.S. military troops. It's about building consensus, trying to help strengthen the foundations of democracy. Really, the Obama administration looked for many, understandable, pragmatic reasons to want to end the troop presence because of the cost of money, the cost to soldiers' lives. But in doing that, in disengaging, and the U.S. military, praised Obama for having a responsible withdrawal timeline. He said he did the right thing there, but what he didn't do was try to fortify a workable coalition that could govern Iraq over these past 4 years, or to preserve these issues that Mohammed Al-Maliki was talking about, human rights abuses. Iraq actually had a decent human rights ministry, not perfect, but one that exposed secret prisons that were run by Prime Minister Maliki's military. And in the government formation process in 2011, that ministry was gutted and turned into a wing, basically, of Prime Minister Maliki's party, and people who had been encouraged Iraqis to expose these abuses by the Americans had to flee the country. So I think when we talk about Iraq and the failures of the Obama administration in Iraq, and I think that Iraq for America is a bipartisan failure, and it's not about troops staying or going, it's about these core issues that are democratic values. The Obama administration looked at how does the United States get out, and how does Iraq stay stable? And what they chose was Prime Minister Maliki as their guy. And at the time they made that decision, it wasn't necessarily a wrong choice, but they focused on personalities and not values, and building the foundations of a government that could work. And that's a large reason of why we are where we are today, both the United States and Iraq, in terms of the implosion we are seeing.
Mohammed Al-Maliki, I wanted to go back to the issue of ISIS. It's been described as an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, to some degree rejected by Al-Qaeda, but you've suggested to some degree that it is now eclipsing Al-Qaeda as the main Islamist group contending against Western powers. Could you talk about that?
Yes, it's an irony to say that the downfall of occupation of Mosul city ended actually Al-Qaeda in terms of among jihadists to look up to as their icon. ISIS was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda that al-Zawahiri tried to end and limit Nusra to Syria and the Islamic State in Iraq to Iraq borders. When Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, rejected that order and actually joined the foreign fighters in Syria to his ranks and started fighting al-Nusra, everyone was saying that these jihadists will kill each other in terms of continuing fighting. But now, with all of these, say, victories that they have achieved, it marks, in my opinion, the downfall of Al-Qaeda to be number one in the eyes of the jihadists, and making ISIS more appealing to them, as it will achieve Caliphate in Iraq. And Baghdad carries a symbol. Baghdad was the capital of the Islamic State for hundreds of years. Baghdad is not any city. And them heading towards Baghdad, using all that Sunni anger, is marking a point and trying to win hearts and minds of all Islamists and probably most of Sunnis all over the world.
Speaking of hearts, Mohammed Al-Dulaymi, this must be breaking your heart, seeing what is happening right now in Iraq, the largest, fastest mass movement of people in history. And do you think Baghdad will fall? And what do you think needs to be done right now?
It's not only breaking our hearts. The images we're seeing coming from my city, Fallujah, or coming from Ramadi in western Iraq, and now Mosul. There are videos of Iraqi army random shelling victims. A father is looking to his sons and daughters killed, their members killed, and their members are spread all over the ground, and he's in the middle of the street. And all of that fueled a huge sense of anger towards the military, the Iraqi military. And ISIS sees that moment. ISIS is now portraying itself as the protector of Sunnis. And if you ask those who left Mosul, except for many of our Christian and Yazidis who are living in Mosul, they are afraid of the random shelling of the military. So it's amazing that ISIS can adapt to use politics, and the Iraqi government cannot evolve to that limit. It saddens me to see my country is about to fail. We are a 7,000-year-old civilization. I cannot comprehend the idea that Iraq lacks leaders that can bring Iraqis together and face all of these extremists trying to take over our country. Extremists coming to us from all over the globe, from different ideologies, whether they were Sunnis or Shia or any other extremists. It's amazing to me that we as a nation are losing our identity, are forgetting who we are. And it's breaking my heart to know also my family has been displaced for 6 months. I know of people who are living in schools, living in the wide open, shifting shops. Fallujah is now shifting another soccer field to become a graveyard after the first soccer field that Fallujahs had to makeshift as a cemetery. So yes, it breaks my heart, and that's why we're here. That's why we're, that me and myself, and I think Ned will support me on that we strongly think, and I think, that there is a lack of understanding for what's going on in Iraq. And there must be something done, and really fast. And, the Iraqi politicians today also failed to come together, then that saddens also.
I'd like to ask Ned Parker on that. What has to be done, or what you think with the role of the United States, at least at this point, given the fact this was a complete surprise to the United States government? It reminds me very much of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, or of the Taliban after the Russian troops pulled out, suddenly moving across the entire country. Your sense of what needs to be done now?
Right. Well, I think what's happening now, events in Iraq are happening so rapidly, and I visited Iraq in November and December on a month visit, and then I was quite alarmed and worried that the country was sliding towards a new sectarian conflict. But even then, January, basically right after I left, end of December, we saw Anbar fall apart. Today we have, including both Nineveh, Mosul, and Anbar, we have close to 1 million people who have been displaced in the last 6 months. People that Mohammed alluded to who are sleeping in schools, sleeping out in the desert. I mean, it's a humanitarian disaster. It's very hard to get aid to the displaced in Anbar province. So events, I was just in Iraq. I left a little over a week ago. I'm going back very shortly. I was amazed by what I saw on the ground on both sides. I have a friend whose a close friend of his was in a mosque praying in Baghdad in the middle of the day, taking a break from work, and a suicide bomber from ISIS went inside this mosque and killed about 21 people. His friend, I believe, is still in the hospital. He's lost his foot. His body is, packed with shrapnel. The hospitals in Iraq have so little, the doctors really cannot take care of his case. I mean, it's very bleak. We have this militia involvement now that's been going on for at least 2 months, working, authorized by the government. I've talked to Iraqi officials who feel that they have no choice but to activate the militias, knowing that it erodes the authority of the state, but feeling they have no choice but to use that against ISIL, knowing that they don't have a game plan for the way out. The United States has frittered so much of its influence now. In 2010, it had the ability to help. It was seen as an essential arbiter because of its history in Iraq since 2003, for better or for worse. But it was seen as an essential referee. It had a real vote in what happened and how the government was formed. Its soft power was substantial. I don't think that's the case today. So what can the United States do? I'm a journalist. I'm not a think tanker. But there are different schools of thought. I mean, the Iraqi government, those close to Prime Minister Maliki, they want airstrikes. They would want more intense intelligence, support from the United States. I was talking with a former U.S. commander yesterday who was saying the intelligence that we're providing now is minimal. It's probably, he wasn't giving me numbers, but I would say that there's been an additional 100 to 150 people brought in recent months to provide intelligence support. But if you don't have people on the ground, you can't develop the sources for targeting. But yeah, go on.
I was just going to say the disconnect is incredible. As the ISIL fighters captured Tikrit and pushed toward Baghdad on Wednesday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I don't know if you watched this yesterday, met to question President Obama's nominee for the next ambassador to Iraq. Yet Nancy Youssef of McClatchy reports not a single senator asked him directly about the Iraqi government's apparent loss of control. They also didn't ask questions of the man who sat next to him, the current U.S. ambassador to Iraq. The House Armed Services Committee, meanwhile, met to discuss the prisoner exchange that freed Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, but did not ask Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel a single question about Iraq. A Senate staffer told McClatchy, quote, "I think there is a general sense of apathy about Iraq."
Right, and I think the danger is that you're seeing basically a cesspool of extremism emerging between Syria and Iraq, a cesspool of Sunni extremism and Shia extremism. The other week, I met an old Sunni friend from Iraq in Istanbul, and he had been a relative moderate who had fought Al-Qadea, and he still is a moderate to a point, but he has been changed by the violence of the last 4 years. He is very much an Islamist now, and being an Islamist isn't necessarily a negative thing, but you can see the ways in which he's been shaped by the sectarianism of Iraq and Syria. And if there isn't a way to moderate these things, surely it's bad for world stability, whether we're talking about simple things such as oil reserves and the price of oil on the global market, or the threat of terrorism to the United States. But getting back to that issue of what does the United States do, I think the U.S. policy right now is to give weapons, and it's a minimal amount. Rightly or wrongly, the Obama administration views Iraq and Syria as conflicts that it should avoid getting deeply involved in. It does not want a repeat of 2003 and the Iraq experience. The danger, though, in doing nothing is that you have this virulent extremism emerge that could destabilize the world. So what are the choices in there that avoid having troops on the ground? It's very difficult to know. But the Iraqis do want America involved because of the military assets. So then, if that is the way that the United States decides to go, it should also have a corresponding program to promote moderation, to promote Western values, so that you have checks and balances, functioning judiciary, so the security forces don't torture people, which breeds extremism and strengthens Al-Qadea types.
Ned, we want to thank you for being with us. Be safe as you go back to Iraq. Ned Parker is the Baghdad bureau chief of Reuters. And Mohammed Al-Dulaymi, thank you so much for honoring us with this first broadcast that you're willing to do, having worked for McClatchy for years in Iraq, of course, being from Iraq, now applying for political asylum in the United States, speaking to us from Columbia, South Carolina. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Cairo, to Egypt. Stay with us.